Okay, so this morning we're going to talk about APIs. We're going to take an existing app that I'll walk you through in a minute. We'll look at some of the functionality it already has, and then we'll start adding third-party functionality with APIs. But before we do that, what is an API? If you haven't heard that term already, you're definitely going to hear it more and more and more the more you get into web development or any kind of development. In the past, well, what are APIs? Let's just start with that. What's an API? Or what is your understanding of an API?
Application programming interface.
Cool. Did you just Google it?
Yes.
Nice work. That's the way to do it when you don't know what's going on. Application programming interface. What does that sound like it is? What is it though? It helps out with your web page? For sure. It could definitely do that. What else? What do you think? John Conway, I know you know.
Mouth full of ham right now.
Well, swallow it and give me an answer.
What was the question?
What is an API?
Well, I think James already says application programming interface. I know, like when I think of API, I usually think of like, let's say Google Maps or something.
Yeah, Google, we're going to use Google Maps today.
Where, you know, you have an interface and it also can interact. Like you see, so you go to these like a rental, like an apartment rental website and have like the Google Map locations.
Sure.
Just have the Google Maps like on their website. That's what I think of when I think of API. It's like Google Maps is an app by itself, but it's also interacts with other apps which use it to cover something they don't want to program themselves.
That's great. I think that pretty much covers it, right? So an API, it's a way for a developer or anybody, but usually a developer, to interact with someone else's app, someone else's program, someone else's code, essentially. So in the past, programmers would write all their code all on their own, right? And so if you wanted authentication, which what have we been using for authentication? And authorization. Devise, right? Which is a gem. So we have not been writing that code ourselves, right? So in the past, you would write all that code yourself. What ended up happening was it was very hard to maintain. You're repeating a lot of code, right? You're rewriting stuff. Your application becomes this, like, it just gets too big, bugs start to form, right? And you're spending tons of time maintaining huge parts of your code base. So the way it works now is a lot of that stuff gets farmed out to APIs, right? So we don't have to sit around and constantly debug and worry about our authentication. There's a whole team that works on Devise, and their only job is to do that. And then anybody who wants to integrate authentication and authorization into their Rails app can just use Devise, right? So we've like pushed that aside to that. Google Maps is another API. Rather than trying to integrate like all this latitude and longitude information and figure out how to get like geoposition, I have no idea how Google Maps works, right? But I've been able to integrate it into a bunch of apps very easily because Google has created this technology, and then they've also created documentation and ways to implement it into any app you want, right? We can look at that right here. So this is the Google Maps API, and we're going to play with it a little bit more later. But this is just their developer guide. Google Maps has wonderful documentation, and that's not always going to be the case with an API you want to use. But we'll go through and look at this a little bit. So that's what an API is and why you would want to use it, right? A lot of these services that are very common are used with APIs. We've been using an API already, actually, Faker. And we've had some experience with this. So Devise is one, Faker is one. This is other code, other functionality that we're bringing in to our code base. Faker has documentation, and we can see, okay, cool, if I install Faker and I do Faker : artist.name, I can expect to get an artist name, right? And so this is kind of an example of their API, right? This is how I can interact and get their functionality into my app, right? Cool. So let's look at what we're starting with. So what we're going to do today, and I'm just telling you right now, we're going to go over a lot of stuff. And the point is not for you to memorize everything, right? Or memorize these steps. It's all in your curriculum. I'm just going to walk through the curriculum. The larger lesson today is to just start to get familiar with and see that there are some different things that you need to keep in mind when you integrate with an API. There are some standard practices that you'll probably do with every API, and then you'll also see that some of the differences that come up. Those are the big things I want you guys to pay attention to today, all right? Not memorizing how to use Google Maps, how to use Geocoder. That's why the docs are there, right? So that you know you can go to them and you know you can find your answers there. Cool. I'll try to highlight the things. I'll try to tell you, like, this will be with every API. This will be something that you definitely need to remember. But for the most part, just following the process is what we're going to do today. We are going to integrate a few APIs into this app that exists already. Some of them are going to be like client-facing, and some of them are going to be on the back end to help us with testing and stuff like that. So APIs can kind of, they run the gamut, right? There are some that we use just for development. There are some that we can use for testing. There are some that we use when we deploy or for our client-facing side of our app, okay? So let's look at the app right now. I already pulled it down. This is in your curriculum. It's called Public Art. I cloned it to my desktop, and I have it right here. So we're just going to get it rolling. I'm going to do Rails DB drop. Do Rails DB create. So I'm going to create my database. All this stuff we've done before, and I will migrate. Cool. Let's see, is that all I need to do? I think that's it. So let's start the server. Let's see what we have. So this is just a basic CRUD app. It's got Devise already installed. Look at our gem file. We have Devise in here. Probably a lot of gems we've seen before. We're going to add more. I think right now there's got to be like 60 gems in total, including the dependencies that some of these have as well. So you're going to start to see, and this will come into play later, like the bigger our app gets and the more functionality we want to add, the more gems we are going to add, the more code we are dependent on. Cool. Let's see. We have one model, which is we have a user model, obviously, so users can sign in, and then we have our location. So let's look at what this app is. It's a basic CRUD app. It's basically the same thing that you've been building. It's a little prettier because we have Bootstrap on it, but other than that, that's it. Where's my login? Register. Register with a fake email. Cool. So all this app is an app for us to be able to log the location of public art in Chicago, right? So I can create a location. Location is the one model we're working with here. Let's just do the bean. It is in Millennium Park. You can tell I already went through this. And it is actually called the Cloud Gate. I went on like a tour of Millennium Park, and the tour guide was very upset that people kept calling it the bean. It's like, it's the Cloud Gate. It's the Cloud Gate. Okay. So I'm passing that information along just for that guy. Okay. So I'm going to create this. Cool. And that's it. So I've created the bean. This is my show page for it. I can go back. I can edit if I want to. I can just say, no, it is a bean. And update. And go back. Cool. This is great, I guess, but what would be much more helpful is if I had map integration so that I could see where these public art pieces actually are in the city, right? So we are going to add that functionality with Google Maps. Okay. So we've already built this out. So this is the sort of starter page for Google Maps API, and you can see it has right away. It's got a code example. That's a thing that I'm always looking for in good API documentation. Is just show me the code, show me code that I can start to look at. There's also going to be a lot of descriptions. You can do a lot more with Google Maps than what we're going to do. We're just going to map one location. You can drop pins and do all this stuff. That's going to involve you getting deeper into the documentation, doing a lot more reading. But I can see right here that if I want to produce this map down here, I just need to add this code. This just looks like HTML. And I can probably just add this and get this map to show up on my page. An iframe is just an HTML tag. So H1 paragraph tag. Iframe is an HTML tag that allows you to put part of another website on your website. That's it. It's just but it's a tag just like any other tag we've been using. Okay, so when I start interacting with these APIs that work a little bit like a service, like Faker, I download the code and I just use the code, right? With Google Maps, I need to interact with Google's servers. I need to interact with Google's technology outside of my app to get things done. And once you start doing that, and then things like authentication with, or not authentication, but if you want to do payment with PayPal, again, that's not happening on your machine. You're sending data out to PayPal servers. They're processing it and then sending you information back. And that costs money. So Google Maps is free, but anytime you're doing this, it's important for that service to know who's making what requests, so that one, they can charge you if they're charging you, or two, if there is a problem or if someone is abusing the service, they know who it is and they can cut it off, right? So instead of having regular, I log in with my email and a password, and I send that every time and I do that login every time, there's a lot of downsides to that for the way you do this. One, it's not as secure, but more importantly, I'm working on an app. We're all working on an app together, right? I use my email and password to get all the Google information. Then I quit, right? And I'm gone, and now my email's gone, or you don't know my password, right? So in order to have a way to log in and sort of get away from some of those problems, most APIs that you interact with where you're going outside of your app will have something called an API key. This is something extremely important to remember, right? Most APIs will require you to have an API key. Usually you'll just sign up with their service, and then they'll give you different API keys for different things, which is also important. I might want to test my app in one way, so I can get an API key for my testing environment. I can get an API key. A lot of these services that charge, we're going to use Twilio, which allows you to send text messages. We'll use that later. They charge, but they also offer you kind of, I don't remember what they call it, like a sandbox API, which just means, if you think oh, a sandbox is supposed to be a safe place to try things out, and you fall down, you're in the sand, you don't get hurt, right? So it's just they won't charge you, but you have a limited number of times you can use it, and it's a way to play with the API, see if you can get it integrated without getting charged, basically, or signing up. So most of these services will require you to just sign in, go through a quick process, and then get an API key. So if you want to use an API, that's the first thing you should be thinking about is how do I get a key? Go on their website and figure out how to get the key. I've already gone through all that because it's pretty tedious. If you have a Google account already or a Gmail account, it should be pretty simple for you to do it. And they will issue you an API key. Google has this great feature where I can actually just click right here on this code, and I've already found this API key, and I can insert it right here into my code. So that's very nice. So let's copy this code over and talk about it real quick before we. Cool. So it's this. regular HTML tag. And then this is going to render on my page. Then it's going to make a GET request. So again, I'm making a request out to Google. It's going to make the request to this address right here. That's going to screw us up. There we go.
Is it not supposed to have a right bracket on line 1 or right caret?
No, it is. The reason this isn't formatted is because it's in an unnamed file.
Okay.
So I'm not going to save this file. I just needed to put it somewhere so we could look at it. I wanted to put it somewhere clean to look at. That's it. Okay, so it's going to make a GET request to Google/map/embedded, blah, 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 all this stuff. Right here where it says key is where I am providing my actual API key, right? The key that is connected to my account. So I put that there. And then this Q, I believe, stands for query, and I can pass it some information, right? Right now I'm passing it space plus needle, Seattle, Washington, right? And we'll start to learn how to make this more dynamic in a minute. But for right now, I should be able to just add this, now that I have my API key, to my code. So I'm going to do two things to do that. First, I'm going to put it in my show page. I want it to show up on the show page. So when I'm here on the bean, I want there to be like a map somewhere here that shows me where the bean is. Let's see. Let's go to my views. Have we talked about partials yet? We have? Okay, cool. So I'm going to make a partial file. And just if you haven't heard, if you don't remember, a partial is just when we have like a piece of code that we know we're going to want to reuse over and over again. A very common thing. You can see it right here. This form is a partial, and we label partials by putting an underscore before them. And I'm just going to say Google underscore map dot HTML dot ERB. And that way, if I want to reuse this, I can reuse it more easily. Cut this right here. We'll save. Then I can go to my show page, and wherever I want to put, I'm just going to copy this here. Cool. So one more time, I'm going to walk through. We got this code straight from Google. This code said, hey, if you put this on your HTML page, it will render a map of the Space Needle, because that's what we're passing in right here. It required us to get an API key, which I got earlier, and I just passed in here. That's unique to my account. I put all this code into a partial, which I am just rendering here on the actual show page below the address. Cool. Okay, so we should be able to refresh. And now let's all keep our fingers crossed because, oh man, there we go. Platform rejected your API request. Terminal error was found for this API project.
How do you know what, is it just looking up show by location? How does it know what Google Map you're looking for when you're doing this? Like, how does
this, right? How does this know which map to get?
How is your Google Map HTML.ERB pointing to the show?
Oh, okay. So this is just a thing with partials. So render is a method that I can call, right? We've used that before. And then I can pass it a show page that I want to render. So render knows that somewhere in this directory, there's a show page called Google Map. And it looks for it, and it just inserts it right here. Kind of like, you know, we have yield in our, it just puts it right there. This right here is a variable that I'm passing there. We're not using it yet, but we'll get to it in a second. So you don't have to worry about this part yet. But we still have to debug and figure out why we're getting this error. So let's see. Failed to load. Responding with 403. I got this yesterday too, and then I don't remember what I did to do it. Let me make sure that I have my API key. It inserted the key for me though, so I don't know why it would insert this. Pretty sure I have to see. I'm going to try one more key, see if that's the problem. Otherwise, I'll have to get my key from the example. This process right here of being like, I put the code in that was on the thing and it didn't work, just get used to it. Like even good documentation, you're going to be like constantly debugging this stuff. There we go. Okay. So I'm not sure if there was a problem with that key because I was using it a bunch yesterday to test this out. Like I said earlier, some of these keys that you get that you're not paying for, there's a limit on sometimes how many hits you can make to with a certain API key. That might have been the problem. Maybe I registered it wrong. I don't know. Anyway, this is another key that I have from a different project. So that I think was the problem. Cool. So now we have our map, which is great. The only thing that's not great about it is the Space Needle is in Seattle and not Chicago, and it's not the Bean, so it's not super helpful right now, right? So looking at what we have right now, how might I be able to, could we brainstorm some ways to, yes?
You could just go to Google Maps and figure out what the URL address is for Bean.
And insert it right there. I could absolutely do that. As I create more of these resources, how am I going to do that each time? So if I make a new resource, or if a user makes a resource, right? I want them to then go to the show page and automatically see the address that they typed in.
I guess this is probably something to do with that instance variable you created called location.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. So when I make a location, we can look at let's look at our schema here. So our location has a title, a description, and an address, right? And I had to enter those when I created it. And if we look at the Google Maps API, this query looks like the actual thing and then a city, right? And this is going to be smart. Google Maps is pretty smart, right? You could probably go to Google and type in the Bean Chicago and it will find it, right? Something like your house, like if I typed in Josh's house, it's not going to find that, right? So something like that, I would have to give a much more descriptive, like house number, blah, 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 right? Does that make sense? Either way, we can pass the address information to Google right here. Because what's happening is we're making a GET request to Google. We are sending it some parameters, just like we get some parameters to our server, right? And then we can check parameters to get username and all that stuff, and that's how we create our resources. We are sending that to Google servers. They require some things from us. One thing is the API key, which will come probably in like params key, right? They'll get that. And then the other thing is what I want a map of. And here, because the Space Needle is very popular and it probably gets mapped all the time, we can just say Space Needle, right? And then pass it to city. So what I want to do is anytime a user creates something, I want to be able to take the address that they entered and pass it to this string right here. And John was right on the money. We are going to use this instance variable right here. Let's see. I do want to change real quick this to I think that'll be enough. Whoops. Okay. So this location that we created has the attributes description, it has a title, and it has this address. So when we render the Google Maps partial, which is right here, essentially you can just imagine that the code that is right here, imagine that now lives in this space, right? And it also has access to location, which we have in here. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand like how we're getting location? Just like any other show page. Cool? Okay. So James, you're like sort of? Okay. We'll come back and walk through it one more time. But let's just get there first. Okay, so I have my location in here. So what I can do is just interpolate. And I can do at location address.
Can you have should you have the breaks in there?
What you mean like the braces?
No, like the spaces.
Oh, these in here?
Yeah.
I don't think it will matter.
Okay.
I think it's just like a style thing that I do. I just do it for readability. I don't think it will matter. I think this will just be a thing, but we'll find out. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna save this. So let's refresh and see if it worked. Oh my God, it worked. So we have Millennium Park, and so I want to show you. Let's find this map now in our HTML. So remember, we can do it inspect, and we can see all of the HTML that is actually on the page right now. I'm gonna have to dig down a little bit here. So here's the iframe, right? And when I get this, does anybody remember how to get this on the side? There we go. That's ugly. Put it back. Okay, sorry. Okay, so here's the iframe. And then right here is the URL, and you can see the query rendered out to Millennium Park, Chicago, Illinois, so that it was able to create this.
Able to just see your API key.
That's a wonderful question. We're going to get to that, and that's actually the next thing I'm going to get to. John's question for the recording for everybody else was, are people going to be able to see my API key? The short answer is with Google, yes, but normally we want to hide it, and that's the next thing we're going to do. After we test this one more time. So let's do new location. Let's do, what? Code Platoon. I don't know if that's going to, well, let's just do it. Platoon. What is the address here?
73 West Monroe.
Let's just do Chicago, Illinois. It should work. We are here. Let's create this location. Hey, there it is right there. Cool. So now we have this these dynamic maps. Every time we create a location, it will reach out to Google Maps and produce that map, throw it on the page for us. Pretty cool, right? And actually, it didn't take us that long. Pretty easy to implement. Any Google Map feature any feature that Google Maps has, you can integrate into your site, right? It's just going to take more digging and obviously a little bit more code. You can see that, like, if you added more code, you can use JavaScript to manipulate this too. That's a little bit beyond what we're at, but just so you know the power of these things, right? Of starting to bring these things in. Cool. Are there any questions about the process we went through here? Big things to remember. You want first thing I would do if I can think of a functionality I want, and I don't already know, is I'm just going to Google like functionality /API, right? Once I find something that looks like it's going to work for me, then I'm going to go into the docs. The first thing I want to do is figure out how to get an API key. I'm probably not going to be able to do anything without an API key. I'm not even going to be able to experiment with it. Some of them will issue one right away. Some of the lamer ones will take like a week to get you an API key. But most of them, it should be a pretty instantaneous process. Once I have my API key, there almost always will be I don't want to say almost always, but a lot of the times there will be a getting started, like copy this code, paste it in your app, you should see something. And then from there, you can start building. Cool? Cool. There are a couple of things that we want to sort of clean up about this. So John asked, are people going to be able to see your API key? usually you want to keep your API key secret. You do not want people to see it. With the Google Maps and with the implementation we have right now, we're going to hide it in our app, and I'll talk about that in a second, but it's still going to end up rendering on the page, right? We saw that this whole URL renders. So we are not going to be able to hide it, and that's okay. Google Maps allows you to have kind of unlimited. It's a free service, right? And if there is a problem, there are ways to kind of tell them. There's also a way, I think, to set up your key to say only accept hits from this address, right? So I could say, like, if someone is using my API key and they're making GET requests from a different website, like, flag that, let me know, right? So there are things you can hold. But if we were using a paid service, it would be terrible if someone got a hold of our API key. And we want to make sure that we hide it. And you also want to make sure, I'm going to repeat this many times because it has happened to so many people I know, you do not push the API key up to GitHub. So wherever it is in your code, you do not want it pushed up to GitHub. And I'm going to show you how to hide that. Happened to a friend of mine, like, not even a month ago, accidentally pushed a key up to GitHub, woke up the next day, $5,000 bill, because people will write bots that will just scan GitHub for API keys. And the second they find them, they'll just start using them, charging them insane, right? He was able to get the bill gone, but that's not always the case. Okay, so all of that, let's talk about, like, what do we do with this API key? So there are a bunch of different ways to save or to keep your API key secret. Different frameworks have their ways. The way Rails does it, and the way Rails has it implemented, is Rails has a handy file already set up for you in config called secrets. And in here, I am able to save any secret information, anything that I want to keep. This does not get pushed up to GitHub. And when you push, it should not. And it should be a good place to keep your API keys. So let's see. Let's do, I'm just going to copy this whole thing because it's quite a bit. Cool. So what's happening here? So here I'm basically just saying I'm going to set this API key. When I ask for my Google API, this code will run. env is, I don't want to get too much into this because it's not super important, but right now. But env is environmental variables. We can store variables that we can have access to kind of throughout our app. And the secrets file uses those variables in order for you to fetch them. But that, not understanding this code 100% is okay for right now. We want to then, let's see, my development secret code goes here. So it looks like we can just take this whole API key, cut that, put it here, save it. I want to put the same, so I also want to put this, whoops, here. I'll put it here too. You can also see that I can keep secrets for development, test, and production. And I kind of mentioned earlier, you might have a different API key for development, a different one for test, and a different one for production for various reasons. You might be using like a sandbox one for development, and then you might want but you might not want to, you don't want to be getting paid every time you're just doing test hits, right, to the server. Or I'm sorry, getting charged. So you would use a different API key for that. It's pretty common. We're going to use the same one for all of them. Right? Cool. So now I have this here. How do I get this back into my, or into my code here? I'm really asking. I forgot. Rails application. There it is. All right, let me just copy and paste this. You have to watch me type it, and then I will talk you through exactly what it is. Oh. Wait a minute, sorry. All right, so we're doing some more, we're running some more Ruby code here with our ERB. I'm saying I'm going into my Rails application, right? This code, going into my secrets, and I'm specifically asking for Google API key, which I hope is what I called this. Yes, Google API key. So this is helpful for two reasons. Now I can push this code up to GitHub, right? And my API key will not be exposed in all my views. Two, if I have this key sitting, if I need this key other places in my app, now if it changes, I don't have to go 10 different places to change it, right? So we're doing single responsibility, or not single responsibility, but we're doing dry code, right? We're not repeating ourselves. So anywhere I want the key, I just have to run this line rather than completely replace the key each time. Cool? Does that make sense? So this, hopefully, we'll keep our fingers crossed, should still work if I refresh. It did not. Platform rejected your request. You must use an API key. It's not rendering our key for some reason. Rails application. Does anybody see, are we missing something here? This is the joy of working with APIs. You know what I think it is? I think I have to stop my server. There we go. Okay. So Rails loads these environmental variables when you start your server. So we're kind of, and this is us being spoiled with Rails, right? Like we can make a lot of changes to our code base, and like that refresh feature that Rails has for the server will work for a lot of it. When we add changes to like a config file or something like that, a lot of that gets loaded up right when the server does and does not refresh. So I think that was the problem. So we were asking for this key that according to the Rails that was booted up, did not exist. Okay, cool. That was a lot of stuff. Are there any questions so far before we move forward? Oh, cool. Okay. Let's see. What's next? Great. We are going to implement 2 more APIs. We're going to do one. We'll take a break, and then we'll do the other one. Or no, I lied. We're going to do 3 more. Sorry. Okay. So this is Google Maps. Now what we're going to do, we're going to add another layer on top of this, right? So we have our base app that we built in Rails. Now we've brought in one third-party API, Google Maps. We're going to bring in another third-party API. And this one, what I want to illustrate to you is that this one's going to work with Google Maps and with our app, right? So now we have an API that like is kind of building on top of an existing one that we're already using, okay? It'll make more sense as we go. So right now we have this, and we were even saying like, if I type in an actual location, that gives me a pretty good idea of it on the map. If I type in something like popular, that'll show up on the map. But when we are mapping things, getting something as accurate as possible is helpful, right? And the most accurate way to map something at all, and definitely with Google Maps, is to get latitude and longitude, right? And we cannot expect and should not expect our users, when they map something, to know the latitude and longitude. We don't want them to have to look up the latitude and longitude. We want to be able to do that for them, right? So when they map something, we want to be able to go to another service, get lat and long, and save it in our database, right? So there's a gem for that called GeoCoder. Is this what? Ask anyway.
You're helping your friend with the app that like locates
the water tanks?
Yeah.
Yep, that is me, and this is a gem I use. Yeah, we used Google Maps for that. We used GeoCoder. We even used, there's even a Rails Google Maps gem that if you want to expand some of the Google Maps stuff and have it easily integrate with Rails, you can do that. I'm going to get to that in a minute, but there's actually a lot of these APIs, especially the popular ones, will have gems that help you integrate them into Rails, right? So yes, so this is GeoCoder. Again, so I had never even actually heard of this gem. I'm glad you brought that up. We had this problem, right? We wanted to be able to get latitude and longitude. We just started Googling around, how do you do that? And we found this gem, this third-party API. And then we started reading through the documentation to see how to implement it, right? A lot of these ones, especially with their docs on GitHub, are pretty good. Like, so it'll show you some of the, although now I'm going to be proven wrong because this one won't be. This is pretty good, though. Geocoding objects. So this shows you a lot of the functionality. Let's go up here. Usually there's like a getting started or like search. Seems to be more functionality. I think they also have a website. Let's see. Here we go. So this actually is great. They have a website as well. So let's see. So install. That looks pretty easy. We've done that before. Let's do this. So it looks like gem install GeoCoder. We know we don't have to gem install with Rails, right? We can just throw it in our gem file and bundle. So let's start there, and we'll see how we build this out. Is that it? GeoCoder, cool. That should be all I need. I'm gonna stop my server. I'm gonna do bundle install. Cool, that should give me, so that'll give me the gem. Let's see if there's anything else we need. Geocoding. I've used this before too, so I think we only need one other thing. Okay, so simple geocoding by street address. That sounds like exactly what I want. I want my user to put in a street address. I want to be able to get the latitude and longitude. It looks like right here, app, models, venue is just their model. It looks like I just need to add this code to my model. So this geocode by and after validation, those are methods now that I have access to, I've been given by the geocode gem, right? So let's see. Just make sure we're not missing anything. Basic search. Okay, looks like I can do a basic search just by running this. Geocoder.search and then give it a city or something, right? And hopefully I'm gonna get back some latitude and longitude. Let's see if this works. Let's go into the console. So remember, when I go into the Rails console, all of my whole app gets loaded, right? So all of my gems, everything, I should be able to interact with anything in here, and that should include geocoder. So I should be able to just run this. Oh, it did not give me. Query limit. Let's double check that. I was expecting it to error out and then be like, we're going to fix this error, but that is not the error I was expecting. There we go. Oh, it actually just worked. Why did it work? That's awesome that it worked, but hold on. Why did it work? It shouldn't have worked. Let's see. Oh, no. Sorry, this part should work. We're going to error out in a minute. Okay, cool. So you can see that it gives me back this geocoder object, right? And we've dealt with objects like this before, right? Active record gives us objects that have a bunch of data on them that are related to our database. This is a geocoder object. Again, you can see that getting to the data we want, it looks like all the way down here is latitude and longitude. So we're getting a ton of data, and then it's just a matter of parsing through it. We've done that a ton of times, right? So it looks like we have a bunch of hashes and then some arrays, and it's just kind of digging down to get to that, right? Okay, so that is working. So now, let's see, what's our next move? Cool, let's see how this looks on our app now. This is probably where we're going to blow up. Here, nope. Okay, so geocode by address. We're saying you're going to get an address, and then I want you to give me the latitude and longitude. Then after validation, we're saying run geocode, which means after my model passes all my validations, that's when I want you to actually run the search, gather the information, and save it to my model for me. So we're going to create something, and hopefully after we create it, after I hit create and it passes all these validations, we will get the geocode. Let's go back. Let's create a new location. What should we create now? Let's do the Sears Tower. I think I can just put Sears Tower, Chicago. This one.
Isn't it Willis Tower now?
Nope.
That's right.
No, it is. But everyone, all right, fine. It's, what is it, Willis Tower?
Right.
No, but I hate it. All right. Oh no, it blew up. What happened? Let's see. Undefined method, this was the one I was waiting for. Undefined method latitude for location. So it's expecting that there is something called latitude attached to this object, right? It needs to save the latitude somewhere, and it wants that attribute to be there. But if we look back at our schema, it is not there. We did not create that. So I like this error because it gives us an opportunity to look at how do we add columns. Well, I can't talk and go through this at the same time. Where is it? Thank you, DB schema. Cool. We have address, but we don't have latitude and longitude. So we need to add those to our model. Does anybody know how to add columns? To an existing, so you might have got, this is important because you might have gotten in the practice of being like, oh, I need to add something. I'll just drop my whole database and adjust my migration and rerun it. As you start to build stuff out, that becomes impossible. Back to that project I'm working on right now, like we have it deployed already. It's already deployed online. It already has a database set up. So when we want to add features to it, we can't go to our deployed app, drop the database, and then rerun our migrations, right? We need to be able to add stuff, add columns as we go. Does anybody remember how to do that?
Reactive record generate.
Yeah.
migration, and then add, and then what you want to add.
Mm-hmm. You got it.
Is there 2 T's?
Is there?
Mm-hmm.
Really? Latitude. No. You're
No, I
good.
think I'm right. Latitude. And is there 2? I'm looking at the curriculum and they only have.
Whatever. We're good.
No, I'm Googling it now. You guys.
There's an X.
No, it's just the way it is. Okay. Cool. Oops. That, right? So, damn it, this is so annoying. Okay. 2 locations. Okay. This is very long file name, right? But it's important that it's descriptive. The add is going to tell active record migration that we want to do an add column. So it's going to set up some code for us. It's important to be really descriptive about what you want to add. As your app grows, you'll be adding and dropping columns constantly. Not constantly, but like often enough. This actually, because we know we have these time codes too, right? When the migration runs, it'll have a time code in front of it. This is a great log of changes made to the database, right? So it's important to be descriptive with them. So for both those reasons, for active records, so it knows what to do, and just for the history, maintaining a solid history of your app. So we can run this, and then hopefully it will not explode. Cool. And it's going to make our migration right here. And it already set it up for us. So all we have to do is tell it what columns we want to add. And I've lost my, well, I'm just going to copy these. Cool. So we know we need to add a column to the locations table. We're going to call it latitude, and we're going to give it the data type float. Same thing on line 4, but for longitude. Cool. Question about this? This should be kind of review. But I did want to make sure that we went through it to illustrate like that this is possible, that it's important, and that you'll be doing it a lot, adding columns like this. And that as you add these dependencies, you'll start to find like, okay, this gem requires this thing. How could I have known that? When I first started my app, I didn't even know I was going to use this gem, right? So you will run into this stuff, and that's part of it. That's part of it. Okay. Let's get this working, and then we'll take a break. So we're going to do Rails DB migrate. Let's run our server. Let's fingers crossed start all over. Here. Let's create a location. We're going to do this here. Sears Tower. Sears Tower, Chicago. This is the Willis Tower. Sweet, that worked. And then we can go here. Location last. Great. So can you guys see this? So this is the location we just created, the last one we created, the Sears Tower. And now we have these 2 new things, latitude and longitude, right? Now from here, I can go back, and now I'm passing address in, right? I'm sorry. Let me actually show you. Right here, right? We're passing location address. I'm not going to do it right now because I would have to look it up to be 100% sure what the formatting is. But if we could have much more accurate and descriptive maps by passing latitude and longitude to our query here, right? And all we would have to do is do location.latitude, location.longitude, right? I'm sure it's like plus or something. I can't remember, and I don't want to have you guys sit here while I go look it up. But the lesson here is like now I have this added functionality. Cool. And now I've used 2 APIs. One, I've just put on top of my app. Then I found a second API that is like kind of working between them. So you can see the power, and then also you can just see how many of these you can start to get integrated, right? How many services can start to get integrated? This is a really important thing. We're going to talk at the end of the day about your personal projects that we are going to have you do. I'm going to tell you what they are. They're going to require you to use an API, at least 2, I think. And just so you understand, I remember when I first started learning about these, I didn't really understand how many of them were out there, the power of them, and the diversity, right? I was like, oh, Google Maps, that's like all I kind of understand, right? But there are also these ones that kind of live in between that allow you to then add functionality to Google Maps, right? And stuff like that. Okay, let's see where we're at. I think we're going to take a break. Cool, we're going to take a break. We'll talk about, when we come back, we'll do an API for testing, and we'll do Twilio. So, okay, so we are back. I want to talk about testing for a little bit. We've added some functionality. We've not added any tests for this functionality. So we're going to start adding some tests, and then as we do that, we're going to actually add another API that's going to help us manage our tests and help us test more quickly. So going back, the first thing that we did is we added the map to our page, right? And so we want to be able to test and make sure that this map appears on our page every time. So start my server. I want to check one thing real quick. Cool. Okay, so I have this test already written, and I want to add it to my show page. Let me format it, and then we'll talk about it. Cool. So it shows Google Map embedded on the page. So we have a location that we're setting up here, this valid attributes. So this is all just regular test stuff that we've done a million times, right? So we can kind of set up all our test stuff out here, down here. And then down on our show page, we want to make sure that the map is there. So there's a couple of different ways that we're going to do, a few different ways that we're going to do that. We're going to make sure that the URL, google.maps.com, shows up. We also want to make sure that it's showing the address for that actual location. So again, we can test for that in the URL. Remember where we were putting that in? Then we might want to make sure that our API key is there. This is another example of if we hard code the API key here, then again, if it changes, now we have 2 places it needs to change, right? So instead, we can use our helper here, which was Rails. Let's run these tests and hopefully nothing explodes. So you can see we also have a bunch of other tests written. And we'll talk about sort of what's happening as we add tests to what's already here. How do I run my tests?
Are you RSpec? Are you using?
I am using RSpec. Yeah, we have a RSpec.
Is it bundles? Does Rails have an RSpec there?
It's just bundle exec Rails.
Let's try that. I have bundle exec alias to BE, but this is bundle exec. You said Rails RSpec? I think it's just RSpec. It's BE RSpec. Cool. There we go. Okay, so we have added this Google thing. Actually, let's do an experiment here. Let's comment this out. Let's run our tests again. I guess that didn't make that much of a difference. Okay, so it shortened it a little bit, right? That's what I wanted to point out. So here we took 9.93 seconds, blah, 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 blah. I took that test out. It took a little bit less. as we start adding tests for things like Google Maps, our tests will get exponentially take longer to run. And what part of the reason for that is that every time I test this, I am making a call out to Google Maps, right? It's going to run all my code, and it's going to run that. It's going to make a GET request, right? So out to Google Maps. And that the more of those we add, the longer it's going to take, right? Let's add some of our geocode tests too, and we're going to see if this changes. So let's say this is hovering right now around 9.2, 9.3. Let's add some geocode tests. Where do we want those? One right here. So we have this location spec. This is basically for our model, right? This is testing our model. And the geolocate, the geocoder code is going to run at, remember we had our validations, and then I added, I'm not going to make you remember, I'm going to actually show you. Then geocode is going to set this and then run geocode, right? So that's a model. That's something that's happening in our models. So we want to test that too, which is this one. So let me add this test. Cool. So this one is going to make a location. It's going to set latitude and longitude to nil. It's going to try to save. That's when it's going to geocode. And right now we have this expecting it to be nil. So what's going to happen with this? What do we expect to happen when we run this test? If we read through it.
It's going to fail, right? Because your location is not going to be.
Yeah. These are nil right now, but why won't they be nil down here?
Because you're calling from location.longitude. Aren't you calling? Oh, wait.
It seems like it will pass.
Yeah.
It does seem like it will pass, but it won't pass. It will not pass.
Okay.
Location.latitude.
It does seem like it will pass, but it will not pass. Let's try it. Let's run it and see if it gives us a helpful error. I don't know if I have my helpful errors set up. Cool. It said, one failure. Expected nil got 48 point blah, 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 blah.
Okay, so those nils are default values that get overwritten?
Yep.
Okay.
So once again, and this is getting a little bit too deep into, not too deep, but so the way this geocode gem works is when I click save, when I click save, when I save something, when I save an object, it will look for the address and then take the address, make a call out to a separate server, right, a separate service with that address, process it to get the longitude and latitude, return it, save it to the object, right, as latitude and longitude. So what's happening is we're giving it this address. When we click save, geocode basically fills these in for us. Cool. And then saves it to our database. So that's why this is failing, right? So let's make it pass really quick and then see how long it takes to pass. So let's see. Let's do. So how could we make this pass? What's one thing we could do if we want to make this pass?
We could just figure out what the longitude is.
Yeah, so we could just pass it this, right? How does that look? It's 2 equal, right? EQ.
Yeah.
Like that. Cool. And then the other, it's going to fail again, right? Because we don't know this one, but hopefully it will give it to us. Yeah, here. Here's this one. Cool, so now we're passing. This is not the best way to do this, though? Can anybody think of a couple of reasons why? This will get us so far, but
So we have to change it each time.
we'd have to change it each time. Yeah, so if we wanted to write more tests, then each time we're going to have to figure out, right, that. I mean, we could use the same object. There could also be, Google could, I mean, longitude and latitude is going to kind of stay the same. Something I've heard brought up, though, is like Google could change where it's measuring things from. I don't know. Like there's all these different things. They could start adding decimal points, right? I don't really know. But we're relying on an exact number and that we're getting from something else. And that can be dangerous in this instance, right? So we can change our test to basically just look to make sure that we're getting something in our latitude and longitude. And we can just do this. Does this make sense? Both of these will work, but we're going to go with this one. And also I wanted to show you that now we are up to 9, so we're taking more time, right? Oh, that didn't work. Why did that not work? Save to change. Expect results to have changed. But, oh, because we already created this, I think, is why this is not working.
Can we just say like?
Oh no! Wait! No! I think I need to remove these. Hold on. I think this is the problem. This is something I want to ask John more about too, because I kind of get why we're doing it this way, but cool. There we go. Location, longitude. Yeah, I guess I'm not 100% sure why we needed to remove them from up here. When we call location.new, it's going to have those attributes. I'm not sure why we needed to change them. I'll have to ask John about that. Okay. Now we are at 1 second, though, right? So we've gone up and up and up. When I ran these tests this morning, I was at like 0.6, and as we've been adding these tests, it's gone up and up and up. So you can imagine as your app gets bigger and bigger and bigger, so you're testing more and more things, this will just continue to get huge. Part of what is making everything take longer, like I said, is that we're making all these external requests, right? So we're going to bring in another API. This one is specifically going to help us shorten our test time. When you have these bigger apps, tests can take up like hours to run, you know, and that's time you're spending not being able to debug, not being able to code, right? So there's a gem called VCR. We're all old enough to remember what a VCR is, right? I have to explain it. Cool. Let's bring this over here. So here's VCR. And it's going to incorporate, it's going to go into our, it's going to work with our tests to allow us to avoid having to continue to make these GET requests over and over and over again, right? After I make a GET request and I get the response, I don't have to do that over and over again. If I get a good response and it's a reasonably reliable response that I'm going to get back each time, VCR is going to save it for me. And then when I run my tests again, it's going to make a call out to that saved response rather than actually going to the server. Does that make sense? So it's kind of just like saving a copy of it. And then it's called VCR because I can choose to like tape over these files and put a new one on there, or just keep the old one and rerun it, right? So this is a new gem to me. So let's all set it up together. So we need two things to set this gem up. We need the gem itself, and then it has one dependency that we need to add as well. All of this, by the way, if I have not said this, is in your curriculum. I'm going through it verbatim. Cool. So here we're going to add these. We do what every time we add a gem? Yeah, we do bundle install. Great. So we've worked with a lot of gems that we've just been able to install and then work with, right? Some gems require that we configure them, that we set up some, that we set up, set some settings, that we tell it, give it some specific behavior, stuff like that. VCR is one of them. So let's see. We can add that config stuff. This is all in the VCR docs too, and this is the frustration and importance, and I promise it will get easier, of knowing that I'm going to have to go through the docs, and the docs are going to walk me through how to set this up, but I still might be doing some debugging. You're using other people's code, right? And then you're incorporating into code that you wrote. So there's no way that every single like combination of code has been considered, and that's where you're going to be like working through and trying to incorporate things, right? Hopefully this will be more straightforward than that, but as things get bigger, just expect that to be part of the process. Okay, we want to go to specs. I think I want to make a new folder here. Cool, so I'm going to make a folder called support. And then in there, I'm just going to make a file called vcr.rb. And in there, I'm going to put some configuration. Cool. So I'm requiring VCR. I'm setting up a configuration block so I can configure some things. Cassette library directory. This is just saying this is where I want you to save these copies of these requests, right? This is another gem dependency that I honestly do not 100% understand, but that's okay. Get used to that too. You're gonna install something, and it's gonna be like, we also need this, this, and this, and it's not. You can never understand everything. So you want to start to figure out like, how much do I need to dig into each thing, right? If VCR works with this thing and I don't need to dig into it, fine. If it breaks and I find out I do need to dig it into what WebMock is or how WebMock works with VCR, then I can do that, right? Cool. So I'm going to set some configuration up. Let's make sure it is in my Rails helper too. I think it is. This is requiring every single file, so I think it should be good. We'll find out. Okay, so now let's add VCR to our tests. Oh wait, so let's run our tests again and see if it blows up. I think it will. Yeah, so now everything is exploded. We've added VCR, but we have not told our tests to use it. I think that is the problem. Let's see. It has been made. VCR does not know how to handle it. Cool. So we will go into our test. And we have it. Geocodes the model. Okay. We're going to modify this test a bit. So to tell it to use VCR. Cool. So here's where we're using VCR. We're saying use cassette. Save location is, I think, what we set here. Yeah. Let's run this again. We're still blowing up. Why are we still blowing up? I think we also need to go Just one sec. Debug this for a minute. What am I missing here? Oh, okay, I think I got it. Here's what I want to do. Sweet. All right. All right, come back. I lost you all, and that's all right. But now you must come back. And I will tell you what I did. Okay, so I did want to set VCR true. I just did it in the wrong folder. So here in my model test, I'm able to just pass VCR here. But for some reason, the settings for this is my controller tests, and that's where it was blowing up. My controller tests did not know to use VCR, and so I was able to pass it this right here. This is just a quirk of VCR, of this gem specifically. And again, just get used to like digging through docs and figuring out, oh, I need to set this to this, right? But now you can see that all of my things are passing. Cool. And you can see the first time I ran, VCR hadn't made a copy of anything. So it took 1.9 or 1.19 seconds, right? The second time I ran it, instead of making those calls to the servers itself, it was reading from this file here. So support, application, here we go. So you can see this is a copy of the HTTP request, right? So it read from this, it knows that it was a GET, it knows where it went, and then all the information of the request and the response. Does that make sense? Cool. So that took us, that was a little bit, that was not the most fun gem to set up. It took us a little bit to set up. But it is an important thing, I think, to illustrate, not VCR specifically, but to illustrate that there are going to be APIs, there are going to be gems out there that you're going to want to integrate just to help you make the damn thing, right? So, like I said, as testing gets more and more arduous and takes longer and longer and longer, there's a gem for that, right? There's an API for that. Other things as you build that start to get frustrating or as that you want to scale up, there's going to be APIs that you integrate just to help you build. So now we have stuff that's client-facing. We have stuff that sort of helps us interact between our app and a gem and an API, right? Sort of like a middleware API, which was geocoder. And then now we have this API that allows us to speed up our testing, right? Takes a little bit to, these things always take a little bit to set up, but the time that they end up saving you in the long run makes up for it. Cool. Let's do one more. I want to do Twilio just because it's a pretty cool one. People like to incorporate it into their apps, and it hopefully will be pretty easy. The thing with Twilio that always ends up tripping me up is not the code. The code is usually not that bad. It is the like making sure everything's registered correctly on their website, which I think I did yesterday, but we will find out. Okay, so has anybody ever heard of Twilio or used Twilio? Know what it is? No?
Is it just a mailer?
It allows you to incorporate a lot of things, but we're going to use it to incorporate text messaging into your app. So if you want your app to be able to send a text message to someone, Twilio is where you're going to go, right? Lots of apps use this. You can see like Lyft uses Twilio. Like if you ever get a text message that says like your Lyft driver is arriving or they're around the corner or whatever, that is something that, so you can see even these huge companies are using APIs, right? Lyft doesn't write all that code themselves. They incorporate Twilio's API into their app, and then they're able to send that stuff out. Cool. All of these, there's more. Netflix, I think, has something. Netflix uses it. All sorts of companies use Twilio. Twilio is one of these things that is a paid service, but we can like experiment with it for free. And it's pretty cheap in the long run. It's like 0.0 something cents a text message. I don't know. But significantly cheaper than if you were sending your own text messages, right? Okay, so again, what do we need first if I want to incorporate with an API, if we remember from earlier? Or I want to start using an API. What's the first thing I need to get? We need to get a key, and that's going to involve me registering, right? That's a really annoying thing, so I'm not going to make you watch me register. I already registered. After you register, you'll be able to go to your dashboard and you can create a project. So I have two keys here. I have an ID key. This is just the ID to my, this is sort of like my username, right? And then down here, I'm not going to reveal it because it is recording right now and I do not want it on the internet. I'll incorporate it in a minute after I pause. But here is my authentication token. That's like my password, right? Not super concerned about my ID because that's pretty useless without my password, which is my authentication token, right? Cool. So I have those things. I'm going to pull them off here so we're not recording them. And then let's see. So let's go back to our app, which is here. So we've incorporated a map. We did not actually, but we're going to pretend that we incorporated that map is finding locations with longitude and latitude. We know we're only a few steps away from that. We've also significantly sped up our tests. And now, let's say every time someone creates a location, I want to get a text message. I want a text message to be sent to me. So let's look at how we can implement that. We have to do a few things. Let's see. So first, I'm trying to think of what's the best way to get started here. Okay, we want to incorporate, so we have our API key and we want to put that in our secrets folder. Find that. I'm just going to copy this. So we need a few things in order to send a Twilio message. We need that ID I told you about, I just showed you. We need the token, which I did not show you. And then we're going to be working with 2 different phone numbers. When you sign up for a Twilio account, they give you like kind of their own phone number that's associated with the account, right? And then you also, we're going to need whatever phone number we want to send the message to, right? We're going to need those 2. I already set this up yesterday, and it took me a while so I'm going to copy this. Let's see. Which is which? Okay, so I'm going to do my ID here. I'm going to and then the phone number, I believe I want to use is this one. So this is all from my Twilio account. I just set this up before because it takes a little bit just to get all this configured. But it is, I'm saying it takes time. It's not hard, right? These services, especially these big ones, they want you to use their service. So it's pretty easy to just walk through step by step, verifying what you need to verify. And then, so this is going to be the number here. And then I'm going to pause the recording and not show you my. Cool, I'm back recording. I just added my API key to the secrets folder, and so now I'll be able to use that, hopefully, to get Twilio up and running. Twilio also needs to be initialized, just like our last one. So we can go into config initializers. I think I just make a Twilio one. Again, do not need to memorize the steps that I'm taking. I just want you to be familiar with some of the things you might need to do to set up different APIs. Twilio involves making this config folder in initializers. I'm sorry, making this a twilio.rb file with these config settings in it and putting it in the initializers folder. And then you can see that I'm setting the account ID and my account token, and I'm grabbing those with the variables just like I did before. Okay, going into secrets and grabbing those. Okay, this should be everything we need to do, but let's. Yeah, I do skip something. Hold on. I needed a gem. Make sure I don't need this gem. I'm pretty sure I do. Yep. So I mentioned this before. When you're using a big framework like Rails, there's the JavaScript frameworks so Rails, we would install gems. Remember earlier we were using JavaScript and we were doing npm install. We had the node package manager, that's npm. A lot of these things will, these APIs will have created, or someone else will have created a gem or a package that will help you do a lot of this setup, right? Or provide you with some methods and stuff to help you use them in your app. Rails has one for almost everything, right? Most APIs that you want to incorporate into Rails have a gem associated with them that are going to allow you to get set up quicker and get everything integrated more quickly. I mentioned that there's one for Google Maps. We just did not use it. We set up Google Maps manually, but we could use the Google Maps gem. Okay, so that long-winded thing. We'll put this here. Cool. So I just did it a little bit backwards. I set this up and then I put this in here, and then I set up my code, and then I added the gem. But that's okay. Okay, cool. So I have my gem set up. Okay, so let's do. So I know this is in the Twilio docs. This is, and usually the docs, what they're going to give you is like, this is how you just get started, right? And then you're going to have to problem solve from there. But this is the basic way that I can send a text message from my application. I have to create a client. We've seen something similar to this before. Twilio, ;rest, ;client.new. Faker, we used it in a very similar way, right? Faker, whatever we wanted, .new. So I'm going to create this Twilio client. I'm getting this from the Twilio gem. And then when I have the client, I can run this code and pass it the information that I want. So where is the message going to be from? That's going to be from, remember I set that phone number. I was also set my authentication keys, but I set that Twilio phone number. So that's what this is going to be. Get it from the Rails gem. And then the number I'm going to put here, I think the number I want to use for this is just I have a Google Voice number that I barely know how to use. Damn it, what did I do with it? And that's what I'm going to have it send it to. So what I'm actually going to end up getting an email because my Google Voice goes to email. But you could do this with a regular phone number.
That's your phone number, Josh?
This is my Google Voice phone number that I never check and that I'll change immediately if I ever get a text message from you, John. Okay. So let's test this in the console and see if it blows up. And then we will incorporate it into the app. Cool. So this is messy, but can we see I did this? And then again, I got this object back, right? And what is the message I sent? Hello there. This is a test. Where is it in there? Can we see it buried in there? Here it is. Hello there. This is a test. Cool. So great. That works. We're almost there. Let's say, when do I want this to happen? I want this to happen after I create a new location, right? So where do I go to interrupt? Where would I put this? Where do you think I would put this code? Basically, I just want to run this code in my controller. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Let's go to controllers. We'll go to locations controller. Create. I'm going to create a location. Let's say after it saves, I'm going to run all this. And let's change the message to new location. Created. Thank you. And now remember, we have the variable right here, so we can just go, and it's saved. We know it's saved, location dot address. Could even do the title here. Is it title? Is that what it was called? Anybody remember? You were absolutely right. It does need to be double quotes. I will change that in a second. It is title. Thanks, Ed. Good looking out. Cool. Why does it need to be double quotes? Yeah, because we can't interpolate without it. All right, let's try this. Let's see if I get an email. If not, blame it on John Connolly. Cool. Start my server. Create a new location, which should this one be? We will just do, what else is there in Chicago? Do not, just because I want to make sure this works, I'm going to look up the address. I should be able to do Water Tower, Chicago, but let's just grab this. that there. Survived the fire. I think it might be one of the only buildings that survived the fire. Okay, I'm gonna create this location. Cool, it gets mapped. And then sweet. Let me pull this over. Here's my inbox. And I got a text message. And where did it go? A new location, water tower, was created at, and then here's the address. Cool. I could have just as easily sent this to my phone. Make sense? Okay. That was an enormous amount of information, and so I just want to, just give me a minute, I want to reinforce what was important about it, okay? Not important for you to have memorized how to use VCR, incorporate maps, or use Twilio. What is important for you to know is there are like too many to even start listing APIs out there, just endless amounts of APIs out there that give you access to data, services, all sorts of things to help you build your app, etc. There's no point in writing a lot of that code yourself when you can, so it can really speed up your development. It can help you incorporate a lot of, and then you also know that someone else is maintaining it. Those are all important things to know about APIs. You'll need an API key. It's important to keep that API key secret and not push it up to GitHub. What else? Yeah, there's just those different kinds. Getting an API working can be a little bit frustrating, especially the first time you start messing with it. Just know they all work a little bit different. They all have their quirks, but part of working with it, part of being a developer actually, is just debugging and kind of pushing through and doing a lot of Googling. And, you know, hopefully they have great docs. You're probably still going to end up on Stack Overflow at some point trying to solve some problem. Yeah, that's it. That's all I got. Are there any questions about that? Okay, cool. Let me stop the recording. And then we have one more thing we all need to talk about as a group. And then I will let you get to your stuff for today.